Chapter 7, the Bill of Rights Act 1990 and the Rule of Law. 7.1, Introduction to the Bill of Rights Act. The Bill of Rights Act 1990 is a statute that contains fundamental rights that all New Zealanders should have. For example, there's the right to freedom of movement, freedom of expression, the right to not be tortured, and so on. It's a statute that is part of New Zealand's constitution. The statute only holds the government or anyone performing a public function accountable. So, for example, it applies to a local council or maybe even a public sports club, but you couldn't sue a normal person or a private company for breaching one of your rights in the Bill of Rights Act. 7.2, it's not a super powerful act. The Bill of Rights Act doesn't actually have as much power as people often think it does have. That's because, firstly, all of the rights in the Bill of Rights Act can be limited. For example, in the New Health case, the Supreme Court said that adding a substance called fluoride to the water in a place called South Taranaki was against Section 11 of the Bill of Rights Act, which is the right to refuse to undergo medical treatment. However, the Supreme Court decided that even though this right was being limited, since fluoride helps strengthen people's teeth, people's Section 11 right was allowed to be limited in this way. However, the main reason the Bill of Rights Act is not very powerful is because it cannot get rid of a statute that limits people's rights. So unlike in America, where if a law is unconstitutional, the Supreme Court can get rid of it, in New Zealand, if a statute is against the Bill of Rights Act, the courts can't get rid of that statute. All the courts can do is write what is called a declaration of inconsistency. This literally just means a line in their judgment which says something like, "We think this statute is against the Bill of Rights Act." But that's it. 7.3, what the Bill of Rights Act can do. The Bill of Rights Act is not totally useless. That's because the courts can get rid of pieces of secondary legislation or other decisions made by public-facing bodies if those are against the Bill of Rights Act. For example, in the Yardley case, there was a piece of secondary legislation that stopped Defence Force and police workers from working if they didn't have the right COVID-19 vaccinations. Some unvaccinated Defence Force and police workers took this regulation to court, and the High Court ended up getting rid of this piece of secondary legislation because it was found to unjustifiably be against some of the fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights Act. There's a process or a test which the courts use to decide whether a law is against the Bill of Rights Act or not. I have this test written clearly in my constitutional law notes, which you can find a link to in the description of this chapter. Seven point 4, an introduction to the rule of law. The rule of law is a set of rules that says how the laws in any given country should be created and administered. Basically, it's an academic concept that lays out how laws would be made in an ideal world. The rule of law is a very important concept that tells lawmakers in New Zealand how they should create and administer laws. Since the government creates laws that control people without people's consent, the rule of law says that these laws should at least be made in a fair way. 7.5, key principles of the rule of law. Let's explore a few key principles within the rule of law. One key principle of the rule of law is that the law should be applied fairly to all people, unless there is a very good reason for it not to. For example, laws shouldn't only apply to people with black hair and not red hair, unless there's a very good reason for that to happen. Another key principle is that the law should be known by people in advance. This is because people should be able to know what they can and can't do so that they can try to follow the law if they want to. Another principle is that the law should follow rules and not discretion. For example, judges in court cases shouldn't make a decision based on how they're feeling that day. They should make a decision based on clear laws and rules. I could honestly talk about the rule of law all day. It's such an important concept, but I'll leave it there for now. On the screen is a list of 7 key concepts from the rule of law, which are taken from Lord Bingham's book called The Rule of Law.